the companies winning with AI aren't the ones with the biggest budgets. They're the ones who are starting right now. If you've been waiting for someone to cut through the noise and show you exactly how AI could transform your work, your wait is over. Your competitors have already signed up. I'm Kenny, founder of Brim and the host of the AI Opportunity. Welcome to the AI Opportunity. I'm your host, Kenny, and this week I am super excited to have Ian Cook on the line with me. So Ian has got, I think, a really interesting background. So he's currently SVP of AI at technology company Qloo. I think, Ian, it will be really interesting when you tell the audience what Qloo does, because I think there's so many themes around that are going to be very, very interesting for us to unpack.
Absolutely.
But also has a 25-year experience across technology and leadership. So we're really lucky to have you. I'm really excited to talk to you today, Ian. And perhaps you can introduce yourself to the audience.
Thanks a lot, Kenny. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. So I am the SVP of AI at a company called Qloo, like you mentioned. What we do is teach machines to understand culture. We are the power behind a number of apps and companies who will be able to connect information about everything from restaurants to books to movies to hotels to athleisure brands to musical artists. We are ingesting and taking in and building this knowledge graph of culture and taste data where everything gets decomposed into facets of what makes that item, that entity as we call it, of value. And we observe how people interact with them and then say, well, if people who have interacted with these items and these items, maybe they're also going to interact with these other items, these other entities, and we build that knowledge graph and make it available for companies who are trying to do personalization, recommendation, understand markets, understand sections of a city. You can say, all right, I want to know about Midtown Manhattan. I want to know about, and so what's an interesting area, Knightsbridge or Tottenham or other places, part of Rio de Janeiro. We do this internationally and say, this is what is actually popular and interesting among subsets of people who are interested in other things for those locations or for different types of demographics and different types of groups. So like I said, we teach the machine to understand culture and taste. As you mentioned, very generous. I've had quite a few years in technology. So, most people, you'll see founders who are, just a year or two out of college, if they didn't actually leave college to, talking on podcasts. I happen to have a longer career having built products using, well, at the time, data science. And then I became a machine learning engineer. And then I was an AI engineer. And along the way, I started building teams and building whole companies to do this kind of work. So I've built this for healthcare, for electricity marketplace predictions, physical security, meaning cameras, computer vision for consumer apps. A really fun one where we try to measure the size of fish based on one picture, and for the Department of Defense, for, well, I suppose nowadays the U.S. is calling it the Department of War. I'm not going to touch that. The range of things has been terrific, and it's just been a fantastic process, like learning what works and what doesn't and how these things get used by actual people.
Yeah, I mean, really, really interesting. And I remember when we were speaking before, we talked about this idea that your company maps taste, which I thought was interesting because, for a lot of people, they don't naturally think about how AI can help us be more human.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And in many respects, that's kind of what you guys do, right? It's understanding kind of base human insights, right? How we relate to one another and what we like, what we dislike. Could you tell us a little bit more about how the hell does AI do that?
So the whole idea here is there are things that make up what these entities are. So to a certain extent, we can start at the base level and say, for people, we have seen a lot of interaction in between people who like Taylor Swift and a certain athleisure brand, Aloe. And we could drive and say like, all right, great. There's a natural connection there. And then some of those people will also like, say, Kendrick Lamar, or they will like Kimpton Hotels, or they will like certain other brands. That's interesting on its own, but what we really want to understand is what are the commonalities, or what are the things that are making up those experiences and those entities? So what AI helps us do is break that down into its components. So Taylor Swift obviously has a genre, it has a place that she normally plays music, has other genres she's in. There is the fact that she's in fact female and that she plays arenas. Now, maybe your other musical tastes are people who are women who play arenas and do pop music. And then we can say, great, now there's something in common. We can say, somebody who's interacting a lot with Taylor Swift may actually interact a lot with other artists or may like other artists who have something similar. A restaurant has an ambiance. It has music that it plays. It has a cuisine that it serves. It's got key dishes that it will serve, and people might like those. And there are other restaurants that we can say, well, you liked one Mexican restaurant, you like another Mexican restaurant. That's fairly, bland to say that. However, if you like something hip that is serving Mexican Chinese fusion, that is in a very busy part of town, that is popular with the 24 to 32-year-old crowd who also happens to like fast casual food, now let's understand what kind of restaurants fit into that and tell people this is the kind of thing people are interacting with. One of the big things we often talk about are if you like a certain musician or a type of music, and there are connections to it, what seems like a very different type of music. So something like a German EDM and people who like live hip hop shows. Those don't necessarily go together in what you'd think of as like, all right, two people, somebody's going to, old Kraftwerk shows and somebody was going to old, Bone Thugs and Harmony shows. What both of those people might like are energetic shows with public audiences that have a kind of driving beat to it that include, large fan bases. That might be something in common, and we can help do things. And we do. We work with dating apps for people to say, all right, here's some things I've identified that I like. Somebody else has said I've identified things that I like. We're not just matching because you both read the latest Stephen King book. We're matching because you happen to like fiction, maybe you like horror or supernatural. So it doesn't matter that you didn't put in Stephen King for both of you. One put in Clive Barker, one put in Joe Hill, and we can say these people may actually get along because they have similar tastes.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess for sort of in layman terms, just to explain that, you're essentially taking, when you say entity, it's like a piece of information, right?
Mhm.
And you're taking that entity and then you're putting it on a graph of sorts. And
Yep.
then you're seeing the relationships between that piece of information and other information that may be relevant, like what you just gave as an example, which is you identify that someone likes music in a setting which is outside with a nice sort of beat or fast beat.
Yep.
And that might then create an inference, which is, well, if they like heavy metal or they like heavy hip hop,
Yeah.
they might also like this other thing. Yeah.
Exactly. So you can find people, you just think of all these items that you worked with during the day, and we call them entities, but just everything, every brand you work with or a musician that you like, what we're doing is saying, okay, that is what we call an entity, but the way you describe it, all these adjectives you give it, or the way you'd place it in the world, a genre, a location, and we say, all right, we gather all of that information. And now we don't just look across and go, well, you both like Taylor Swift, therefore you're both going to like each other, or you're to this brand, people who interacted with Lululemon also interacted with Taylor Swift. We're looking at the underlying characteristics. When you look at Lululemon, it's comfortable, it's athleisure. You do some workout, but you also do, coffee with friends. We don't know that you're doing coffee with friends. All of our stuff is totally impersonal, but we have genres and styles of things that, what does athleisure mean to people? Like you can then say like, well, perhaps that connects to other things. Maybe there are much more casual restaurants that you would want to go to. Maybe there's like a fast casual restaurant that people who like this brand can go to. But because we picked out, Sweet Green and Lululemon, we know underneath that there's something kind of common about what makes up the vibes on both of those.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's a really interesting point because I guess a lot of our audience would have probably come into interaction with this type of technology if they use social media, right? Like it's the basis of how social media works. When you
Exactly.
get a recommendation from Facebook or X or Instagram,
Exactly.
seeing the relationships that you might be interested in. So
Precisely.
well, I guess there's the social media point. Obviously, social media has got less of a great image these days. And, a lot of people are concerned about, I guess, the extent at which social media can surveil them and has insights on them around
Mm.
personalization. How do you think that organizations, companies, but also the wider industry should really think about AI and surveillance? I mean, you guys are in a really interesting space where must have a super interesting perspective on this because your business proposition is essentially to provide those sorts of insights, which are valuable for end users, not just companies.
It is.
How do you draw that line? How do you think we should be thinking about it ethically?
I think we are a particularly interesting instance of this because we do not do what the industry will call PII, personally identifiable information. We don't take in that Kenny has this many followers and has done these various things and follow you and follow, your background. We're looking at co-occurrences. We're looking at the brands and the information about where people interact. But we also bring in a ton of information from book review sites, restaurant review sites, place review sites, music definitions, music, sort of the DNA stuff that you would think about there about like defining what all those genres are, and then way down a lot of restaurants or hotel reviews. So we're not going in and saying, hey, I need to know everything about you and I need to understand exactly what you've been doing over the past couple of days to start serving you ads. That is very much how you get some of those ads on Instagram. This is why sometimes people are like, my phone clearly is listening to me. I don't think I was doing anything. And then suddenly the ad is absolutely perfect because it was something you were talking about and it feels really spooky. We do not approach that. And I think we're a little skeptical of it. I think we know the ability of AI to just ramp this up into an almost eerie, like I said, phones listening to you, that kind of feeling, eerie ability to know exactly what's going on. And I think that's the sort of core of when you talk about advertising campaigns, like at Meta and all these places, when you go into all of the dials you can turn to target you right at the specific moment that you might be ready to hit purchase on something, and exactly what that should be, because you've, especially on something like TikTok, you've watched a couple of aggressive videos, people complaining about politics these days, somebody complaining about, the state of the economy, and then you're kind of like worked up, and then you watch something that's got a couple of puppies and now you're a little more emotionally sensitive, and then bam, it knows to hit you with an ad right then, and you can hit that button. Oh, I need to buy that. That's going to make me feel better. AI is essentially just steroids for something that's already jacked up beyond belief. We are using AI to try to provide information, try to provide understanding that doesn't rely on that. What we want is to understand culture across groups and across tastes, and to build something that you can put into these types of tools without saying, well, what I absolutely need is 10 years of the individual history of every user on X, TikTok, and Instagram all at the same time to start building anything that's of any value. We've been doing this for 13 years. The knowledge graph is massive. We don't have personal information. I can't go in and figure out what Ian Cook liked and swiped left on and watched for 30 seconds on all of my socials. So we are, I think, like everybody, exploring AI in terms of other things, code development, how it can work, things like you do. How does it help us build presentations? How does it help us do data analysis? But I think we are appropriately skeptical about exactly how fast AI can turn the advertising world into something almost predatory.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic, and it obviously has some very, very apparent moral hazards, right?
Yeah.
Because the way I see it from what you've said is you've got these two kind of bifurcated kind of categories, right? You've got where actually when you group information, you get cultural insight, you get anonymized insight. That can have a huge societal impact, especially around like things like governmental policy, or, as you say, like how do companies make better products for their customers, right? How do they improve people's lives and experiences? That feels very meaningful and sort of a step forward for us. But then on the same time, I think we've all experienced sort of like finding yourself in a loop on some social platforms or video platforms. I mean, I'm always a little bit startled by what I get put in front of me on YouTube these days, right? Because I'm like, who does YouTube think I am?
I
Clearly
worry
not
about this
someone I think I am.
Yeah, you worry about doom scrolling and the echo chamber effect of like, all I'm seeing are the same people who look like me, who think like me, who, want the same stuff as me. And then you add on a little bit of aspiration and suddenly I'm looking through stuff that's like, oh, I'm like you, but I'm a lot richer, or I'm a lot thinner, or I'm,
Yeah.
and it just starts digging into your head quite a bit. Or, YouTube, I think, is a good one. Now that my daughter's of the age to start watching some YouTube and we try to control it, but like there'll just be like a random thing in there that, because somebody's paid for the ad, all of a sudden you're like, that is not at all what I want to see, or is totally appropriate, or it's just like a weird out of left field. And, so much of that is driven by, all right, what terms did someone buy in order to field or like pop up their ad underneath? I like to think of Qloo as going sort of in the other direction. So tons of advertising is, like I mentioned, trying to find the exact right moment for the exact right person to say, you're going to click that buy button. Qloo is a business. We want to help companies sell, and we do that quite a bit. But I think of it much more as, understand, okay, your audience work really well, and you know that they are purchasing this thing you sell. What other types of items are they interacting with so that you can tailor your product and say like, all right, they seem to also be looking for this kind of experience, or maybe I can do brand partnerships or influencer partnerships, because we know that those types of relationships are really strong, so that I'm attracting a larger group of people. I like to think of it as going from, all right, if I have this brand and I know this brand, what else could I be doing? How do I expand who I interact with? So hopefully to go the other direction rather than focus in and just make you feel like the walls are closing in. Go the other way. It's like, oh, I did not know that I would probably like speed thrash metal. I've been going to like German EDM music. I don't know why I keep picking on Germany for that, but I keep going to EDM festivals. Like, all of a sudden somebody like says like, oh, here's another band that's, speed thrash or this metal band. I like it. I'm there. I'm going to participate. So we work with a company that does live events, and we're hoping to like, get people to go from like, well, no, I just want to go see, my country artists. And it's like, well, there's some Americana out there. You happen to like this type of thing. Tons of people who like that also happen to like Noah Khan. Maybe there's a concert coming up and the person goes, yeah, I'm going to give that a try.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting what you talked about with your daughter, because I think that could be a really interesting thing maybe to delve a little bit deeper on with our audience, because many of our audience will be leaders in organizations, and many of them
Sure.
will likely be parents. And I think we're all parents worry about how the world is changing so fast. I mean, the YouTube and the social media examples is a difficult one. I mean, I can give you my own personal anecdote. So
Please, I love it.
I recently was watching a couple of YouTube videos, because there's a lot of tension here in the UK about sort of what's happening around economic policy,
Hmm.
and no one's ever happy with the government, right? So I won't say I'm political, whether I like this government or don't like this government, but I watched a couple of videos that were, let's put it politely, not very favorable to the current government. And what I found fascinating is literally the next day, I was getting adverts from uh, essentially other jurisdictions trying to encourage me to set up my company in those jurisdictions, which I thought was so scary. It was such powerful targeting that I'd only watched a couple of videos about certain policy that was changing in the UK. It wasn't even around tax. It was actually just general business points.
Hmm.
And then I found myself ever since being targeted by two jurisdictions, which I will not mention because I don't want to find myself getting sued by
I don't
two
want to put
very
your
well
social media
known,
person on blast.
exactly, two very well known jurisdictions, essentially telling me all the reasons why I should leave the UK. I found it,
The UK entirely, not even
yeah,
like
leave the
move up
UK.
north or anything.
Set up a business in the UK, take all my staff, take all of our effort there. And I just thought it was so pernicious. And obviously, from my perspective, I like to think of myself as capable and thoughtful, and, I'll make decisions not just based on an ad that targets me. But what about children? Because, if you have a teen daughter, and I have a son who doesn't currently watch YouTube, but, he will one day, I suspect.
Sure.
How can they cope with a world where actually AI is actually maybe extenuating both our differences, echo chambers, as you said, and in some respects has become the authority for what is true? Because, right now, when you're a young person, you probably use something like a ChatGPT or a Claude, but say ChatGPT.
Hmm.
Do you even have the sense to question whether AI is giving you the truth?
That. So you just hit on the key thing. I am not a family therapist or guidance counselor or anything, so I can't tell you what to do with your kids, but I will tell you what I do with my daughter. I am eager for her to be unafraid and to question and to ask, what am I seeing and why? She's 11 years old. So these are really basic questions. So we go through these things and say, oh, well, why do you think you saw that? Or do you think that's the full story? Or what do you think the people on the other side might feel? I don't want her to be afraid of these things. So I don't hide social media. She doesn't have a phone, but she has an iPad that she can use every so often, and she can use some YouTube, but we talk about it. And I, want her to interact with things. So she has access to a GPT account, and she's actually a little bored by it. But when we do things, I ask her, I was like, well, do you think that's true? Or where do you think that's coming from? So I just constantly am asking her to think about what it is she's doing. Do this also with people I consult with, not in the, much more like parent to child way, but say, you cannot be afraid of these tools. They're coming too hard and too fast. What you have to do is engage with them and understand what's going on. So what I would talk to people about, well, I tried AI a year ago and it kind of didn't work. And it's like, that's fine. But these things have grown so much so fast, you cannot be afraid of it. You have to understand what it's good at and what it's bad at. So for things like YouTube, great. You were watching some kid's sitcom. I think her current favorite is something like Bunked or something that's like years old, but she likes it. And she'll get an ad in the middle of it. And she'll be like, what is that? And I was like, well, what do you think it is? Why do you think that they advertise that to you? What's your opinion? And then we'll just ask about the shows. It's like, who do you see in that show? Does anybody look like you? Does everybody look like you? Does it look like what you see at school? It's just a process of this conversation. You can't be afraid of the technology, but you have to be having that conversation that you just mentioned. Is like, you have to question, is like, do you think everything that comes out of this little magic square is true? Like, well, no, probably not. Well, all right, how do we find other information? You can use the magic square for other information, but you just always are looking for ways to say, is what I hear from this actually true?
Yeah, I think that's kind of incumbent on all parents, right? Is to help their children have that level of critical thought and, to be asking questions, almost to be paying attention. I mean,
Yeah.
my sons are much younger than your daughter. He's only 2, so
Oh,
I can have certain conversations at 2. Although he's sharp, he's a very sharp little boy, but he's probably a few years off yet to really wanting to sort of distinguish truth from propaganda. But it is a scary moment. And is there anything for you, especially given the intersection that you work in, where you're not just sort of experiencing AI, but you're also seeing how it can have real value, right? In the cultural sense, but how that cultural sense of value can also have like wider distortions in society. Is there any other areas of AI that worry you at the moment outside of what we've just spoken about?
the big thing that is worrying me right now is this hype and fear mongering about what is generally called AGI, artificial general intelligence. Every one of these major, what they call labs, the frontier labs, OpenAI, Anthropic, even to a certain extent, Google with Gemini and others are talking about AGI and when is AGI going to happen and what happens to the economy when AGI happens. And I think all it does is keep people away from these tools. I just think this is a technology that is going to roll over them whether they like it or not, and it's going to be unstoppable. And what we're causing is just this weird fear of something that we don't even understand in terms of the definition. There is no definition of AGI. There are papers that come out that try, but it all just relies on saying, well, it's just like human intelligence. That's what AGI is. It's a computer that is smarter than a human at most tasks. It's like, well, fine, but does it have social intelligence? Does it have emotional intelligence? Like, what is this thing you're talking about? You dig into it and you find that a lot of these companies just have really like mercenary definitions of it. OpenAI's definition of artificial general intelligence is $100 billion in sales. That's when they can claw back IP rights and revenue sharing with Microsoft. Like, okay, great. When you hit $100 billion in sales, that's, now you've created a new form of intelligence for the world. So I view all of this talk about, white collar jobs, 50% of white collar jobs going away in 12 months. It's just absolute garbage. And all it does is make people terrified to like try these things out, see how they work, they can do, and get to be sort of in control of their own futures. Like, if you know what this can do and you know what it's bad at, when people come to you and say like, isn't that going to do your job in like a month? And I was like, no, because it can't do these various things. Also, nobody's job is just a list of tasks to do that day and to not think about it and have absolutely no interaction with the world and have their brain. Like, it can't be true at the same time that 50% of white collar jobs are going to go away And most white collar jobs spend a ton of their times in meetings. That's human to human conversation that's trying to figure out why you're doing something, why you need to move forward, why you're making certain choices. Like, GI or whatever it is, a Claude code is not going to do those meetings. You're not going to like start a meeting and have Claude code talk to Codex, and then suddenly your company, has decided how to move forward with a new product. It's just not going to happen.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's a very interesting perspective you've got, which is that the kind of marketing really, because I feel like a lot of the narrative around AGI
Mhm.
is in some respects supporting some pretty outlandish valuations, which to
Yep.
be fair, I'm a big believer in AI. So, many of the sort of labs, I think they're doing really amazing work, but
100% agreed.
the reality of it is that, yeah, perhaps the narrative is undermining a lot of people's confidence and kind of, yeah, fostering fear. I think what is interesting though about what you said, and if we can just delve into this a little bit more,
Please.
this idea that individuals who don't lean into AI are actually inviting fear onto themselves, right? Because like you said, if you actually use these tools and you sort of try and put yourself at the cutting edge, the realization is the opposite of what you'd imagine, right?
Right.
You don't go, "Oh, this is gonna replace me." You go, "Oh, I'm safe for a very long time."
Yes.
You know? Yeah, I think that's a really interesting insight. Have you experienced that yourself, or have you seen colleagues experience that? Where is that insight rooted from?
So, because I work in the world of essentially software development, come down to the end of the day, we all sell a product that works, that customers buy and use. But to get there, we build code. And this is where so much of the transformation is happening. And it is happening at a speed that is scaring everybody in software because we don't know what comes next. That said, over the past 6 months, I've had plenty of people that I interact with who just are immediately like, it writes terrible code. It's garbage. You can't use any of that. You can't use any of that. Just this past week, one of the top personalities in software development is just like, I don't write code. I write plans. I do oversight. It is just radically different. And I think that is being blown out of proportion because people think that's coming immediately to every other. It's like code is a very particular thing. And I've seen the people who are just like, I can't use it. I'm not going to use it. It doesn't work. And all of that just get bowled over. Like, and suddenly those folks who thought, I don't need to pay attention because it's just garbage and it'll never work and it's all these things just completely bowled over. And now they, are having to catch up. I think code is a very particular one just because it's a very specialized use case that LLMs happen to be really, really good at. But the people I come across who are just totally dismissive or afraid of it find themselves totally behind the curve when the information starts coming out and saying like, oh, this is helping quite a bit. So I've got friends who are lawyers, so I've got to imagine, you know you should not be using OpenAI or Anthropic to write a law brief or a brief that you're submitting to the bench. There's somebody in Pennsylvania here where I live has got a running count of how many people are doing that. And it's like creating fake cases and fake case law and doing all these things. That said, if you are a lawyer who has to go through discovery and you've got what used to be the equivalent of 10 bankers boxes of documents, this thing is going to be the way you go through those documents to look for the right information and to just be like, no, 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 AI is not going to be able to do it. It's not going to be helpful. Or it just makes everything up. Guess what? You're going to be the low man on the totem pole, a woman on the totem pole for the work because you're going to take too long. Everybody's going to lap you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's almost things are moving so fast and the capabilities are improving so quickly that the momentum feels almost unstoppable now.
It does.
I think, yeah, you're right. Anyone who takes the position that they're going to stand in the way of AI by not embracing it, I think they probably don't have very positive outcomes long term. Because, like you say,
Exactly.
the benefits are so significant for companies and individuals. But I really do think what you said earlier was really useful advice, which is that, in many respects, the fear of AI is the way, right? Looking and
Yes.
working with it is the best way for you to actually realize that as a human, you're indispensable, right?
Right.
And you're going to be indispensable for quite some time, but AI can really accelerate you and kind of turn you into a bit of a superhuman. I think we're seeing that in software engineering already, like we are as a team. I'm
Yeah.
sure you are. And I think that's going to sort of see itself disseminate across all industries. So it's going to be really interesting, but also, yeah, I think it's going to have both sort of exhilaration, joy, and lots of positive, but potentially lots of negative as well in the coming years. That's for sure.
I think so.
Yeah.
There is so much talk about like this is going to bring some form of utopia in the world of plenty, and we're all not going to have to go to work anymore, and we're just going to have solved cancer and nuclear fusion. And we'll have limitless energy because somebody just typed into a chat box how to cure cancer, and the thing goes, oh, nobody thought to ask me that before. Here you go.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. The disruption is definitely going to be real. And I think there needs to be way more conversation about what it means to have big sections of the economy upended with these tools and people having to retool themselves. Now I'm just using the word tool too much, but sort of change their skill sets or find new ways to work with these tools. The history of technology is pretty much the same. I don't think we're going to get away from it. It disrupts and kills certain jobs, but new jobs come online and we learn that we have more work to do. We are, always trying to solve problems, and for good or ill, humans are rife with problems that we need to solve, and we keep either making more of them or finding that we could solve more than we thought before, and we'll just keep moving that way.
Yeah.
Um, I do want to just say I happen to be a big fan and into meditation. And there's a guy named Dan Harris who just has this great comment that, action kills anxiety. If you're worried about this stuff, get involved and try it out, and don't be afraid of working with it, or don't ignore it, because that's just going to make your anxiety worse. Take action, take a look at it, see what's there, and say, not for me right now, or hey, this is, going to do some things that are genuinely helpful. But the paralysis of fear is just a terrible place to be.
Love that. What a great way to end. Actually, yeah.
Perfect.
Action kills anxiety. I think that's such a nice bit of wisdom, and really, really appropriate for where we are in the world when it comes to AI. I'm very aware that we promised you it would be half an hour and we've overrun.
Not at all. I love talking about this stuff so much. I go anytime.
No, this has been really, really fun, and we're very grateful to have you on the show. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, Kenny. It's been great.
I think it's going to be awesome when this comes out. So
Well, I hope everybody loves it.